Thank you very much. I'm coming from a field quite different from yours. For about 15 years, I've been working on ancient epic, that is concentrating on 4 of the major oral... Does it work? Yes, I'm sorry. Concentrating on 4 of the major oral-derived epics: the Iliad, the Song of Roland, the Tales of Hogan and of Hegi, which are a diptych, and the Song of the Nibelungen. Their analysis, precise and contextualizing the original work with an affair of 1,000 pages, led me to a somewhat unusual conclusion, which is summed up in the title of my book, Pensée sans concept. The idea being that epic is a major intellectual tool superior to conceptual reasoning. It has been for me a very great thrill to meet Marta last year at a conference where she presented her research on romanzo criminale as a transmedial world. For the first time, I came across something that really resembled the oral culture of which my texts were part, and which helped them to develop as major intellectual tools. What she was describing was one of the essential features of oral tradition, namely aurality. Epics have always been received through the ear, heard and not read, by audiences physically present, audiences who express their feelings and reactions back to the performer, thus making it a case of true co-creation. So my second point today will be to develop this parallel a little and to show on what basis fan culture could, like epic, be called aural. But I did not cross Atlantic to tell you that nothing is new under the sun and that do not boast Internet 2.0. Medieval Japan already had it. So my first point will be to explain why it could be important that fan culture be the modern platform for aurality. Aurality was the prerequisite for epic work, a dynamics through which literature is able to think. In lieu of a conclusion, I'll ask a question. Can the parallel be drawn further? Can fan culture invent unheard of ways? Can transmedial worlds work as epics did? What it comes down to is to ask, in fact, the question of polyphony. So my first point, epic work when literature thinks. Great epics are revolutionary. They lead a society to change its political, ethical, and intellectual paradigm. We do not see it because we are reasoning from the society the epic has created. The Japanese way of the warriors, for example, is now an obvious feature of Japanese society, and we forget the long time and difficult ways it took to appear. What my research has showed me is that not only is the political system dramatically different before and after the epic, but that the new system has been thoroughly thought out, worked out by the epic. The epic does so with the means of storytelling, of in fact a particular type of storytelling, that which we are discussing here. That is, it does so by developing and letting expand a whole imaginary world, and by letting the structure produce meaning. As a matter of fact, what allowed the great epics to invent something new is a dynamics, which I've proposed to call epic work. Epic not because it would be only in epics, in fact, it's a potentiality of storytelling at large, but because it is in the epics that it takes its most perfect form. So, in a first point, in my first part, I'd like just to say a few words about changing worlds. First, the world is changing. That is, the world in which the epics are born are worlds in crisis, suffering dramatic changes. For example, the 11th century in France has long been called the time of feudal anarchy, and the Nibelungenlied is recited when German Empire is on the verge of implosion. In such times, everything fails. Old values do not hold. Old ways of governing are no longer efficient. Nobody knows literally what to think, what to do. Novelty arose, and new ways are needed, but rituals are vain, and old ways are not sufficient. The problem is that at the same time, these societies get no help from conceptual reasoning. Conceptual reasoning does not help, either because it's not there. That's the case with the Iliad and Odyssey. There, Homer is before the philosophers, before the jurists, before the historic thought. There's all the rational reasoning we know is absent. So either because it's not there or because it is there, but it is vain and doesn't get the solution which is needed. I'll just enter a little in the case of Japan, which is very interesting to sum up this first subpoint. Japan has had a Middle Age very different from ours. For 4 centuries, there had been no wars, not even capital executions. The nobles didn't go hunting, didn't make war, they didn't fight. They held poetry and music sessions, and they went to admire the moon. So for 4 centuries, it's peace and tranquility. And then, suddenly, armed clans rush into the city. They're called by 2 brothers emperors who cannot decide who should be on the throne. So suddenly, after something that just ignored violence in the capital, you have these clans coming and killing and giving the passers-by the severed heads to keep, and telling them that if they are not there tomorrow with the heads, they will be killed themselves. So for Japan, it's really the end of the world. They really thought it was the advent of the end. But it was a moment of it's the 12th century. At that moment, Japanese thought, intellectual thought, is very powerful. It has inherited, for example, Chinese thinking, political thinking. But nobody is able to find a way out of this crisis. That is the moment when Japan resorts to epic. And I'd like to use that term resort, like the resort to the forest. So it had never existed in Japan, the epic poetry, and now suddenly it's here. And it's here, to my mind, to think. Well, once it's here, what does it do? Apparently very little. It builds an imaginary world of entertaining stories. It tells tales, it recounts myth, it gives recipes. But if religious knowledge has always been described in epics, they certainly do not excogitate. They are not thinking on today's crisis. They're doing something completely different. They're telling stories just to lull people. The essential point might very well be there. That is, an epic is not a story. It is a world of stories, where a great number of characters engage in all sorts of secondary stories, which can be and are developed for quite a long time. All these stories are autonomous, but conceived of as related, as part of a mobile world. The Iliad is not the story of the Greeks' raid for rescuing Helen, with a beginning, a middle, and an end. It recounts the length of the siege of Troy, with the main plot, the wrath of Achilles because of Agamemnon's offense, and a number of stories, the day-to-day military operations, the reminiscences of the old Nestor's youth, fights among the gods, and so on. The Hogen and Heiji monogatari even go further. They present themselves as a pure chronicle where everything that happened is supposed to be said. However, under this surface, something is at work. That something is structure itself, which independently builds up an account of the crisis and gives the audience a way to grasp what is at stake in the disorder of the real world. Sometimes, in what I called finished epics, it invents a way out of it, a totally new political and ethical solution which can meet the requirements of the crisis. So epics do so with the tools of storytelling. The first point is that war is an excellent metaphor of the crisis. The disorder of the battlefield is a good way to represent the much deeper disorder of all values and references. But one thing has to be taken into account. In the first time, the epic will not resort to epic work and to the work of the structure. It will try to do things very simply, to take a hold on the crisis by just giving an orderly account of it. And here we will find all the rhetorical and oral devices that have always been described in relation with epic. Formulae and type scenes that lull the hearer by the repetition of the same, when the crisis is the other itself. Duels that nearly always replace the real war melee. Clear hierarchies that organize neatly the world from fate to the gods, the humans, animals, and minerals. So, like all types of heroic tales, epic begins by pretending the world is in order to make it happen so. But the greatness of these texts lies in that they never stop here. After this all too simple presentation of the world, this simplification, they will readmit disorder. It's a sort of resurfacing of the disorder. It's the second moment, the second time of all the great epics I know. Once they have renounced simplicity with this return of the confusion, they will proceed to the next stage, which is epic work itself. The tools are the two forms of the parallel, homology and antithesis. Homology, by repeating and repeating again a recurrent situation, will finally pull the attention to what's common to all the anecdotes in the series. And then homologies will permit hearers to grasp what is at stake. Just a quick example. Achilles' conflict with Agamemnon is felt at first to be anecdotic and psychological. Two men in wrath calling each other names. But just after that, just after this conflict, the text will go on to stage in the whole of the end of the book 1, stage exactly the same conflict in another setting with other characters. That is Zeus and the other gods, especially Hera. And as a result, what will become central is the conflict itself. We can feel, not see, and not clearly recognize. Nothing is ever clear in epic. It's thinking in the dark, groping to find new tools. So we will finally see the conflict, feel the conflict more important than the anecdote. And we'll do so because all the time in all the epic we'll have homologies developing the same topic. Nearly most of the secondary stories in the Iliad, for example, are exactly revolving around this problem, that is autocracy or limited power for the king. Just a few words on the second tool, that's antithesis. It allows for distinctions, like the comparatio, of which it's a translation. This is the tool for trying, for judging, to give the audience the means of knowing which is which in a dilemma. What should we do? The example here will be in the Japanese tales, the hero Yoshitomo, who is ordered by the emperor to kill his father. This is just a terrible dilemma, since in a Confucian country, the emperor is revered as a father. So he's trapped. In the first time, the epics will go on doing things simply. They will prove through three discourses that he must kill his father. But then it will go further. It will show through homologies by staging the same dilemma for other characters, and then through antithesis with other characters taking a completely different option. It will show what are the consequences of each of the choices and what we should do in that time of difficult crisis. So what I've tried to do here is just to give you a picture of what orality does for epic. And I'd like now to go through 4 features of orality to try and see whether fan culture knows it and what it could do about it. Of course, I'm not the first one to speak, to draw the parallel between orality and fan culture, as I'm very far from that matter. For that matter, to be the first one to speak the parallel with epic, from Jenkins to the Wooming group or Maigret. Many scholars have tackled the subject. But my interest, however, stemming from my research is a little different. I think I can recognize in transmedial worlds a cluster of features that make them potential epics, complete with their capacity to invent something new. What I just put there, and which is hardly visible, is the project of one of the great scholars on orality, that is John Foley, and his Pathways project. Foley, I just put the titles because I'll be getting back to one of them in a moment. Just to show this is the way Foley sees our reading today, our creating today. Not creating and reading books with a beginning, a middle, and an end, but taking path among a number of nodes. Building on his analysis of oral tradition and looking afresh at internet, from this viewpoint, he insisted that they functioned in the same way. However, his interest is on authorship and what internet can do to free us from the book and the marketplace. I'd like to pick up the thread of his reasoning and consider now the audience side of the phenomenon. I shall touch on the 4 main features. First, orality as a register. This first one stems directly from John Foley's groundbreaking work. His main conclusion in immanent art is to the effect that orality is above all a register that is a special language common to performer and audience, through which performer and audience can co-create. This corresponds fairly directly with Jenkinian drillability and spreadability. These ensure a common mastery of the transmedial universe. In the special language that is epic register, words are the formulae, the type scenes, but also characters, scenarios, or subgenres. All of these, says Foley, are above all metonymic. They refer to a whole tradition, a complete world, which is intimately known by the audience. Hearers have long been hearing all of those stories. Everybody has always been hearing those stories. Everybody was born in the middle of these imaginary worlds. Drillability and spreadability in the participative media mean that today's viewers recapture this register. They build up this common knowledge, which was the first prerequisite for the functioning of oral tradition and the existence of epic work. The difference could be said to be the substituting of time with space, time with the whole life where one was immersed in stories, whereas the intense involvement of the viewers make them go quite faster. But that doesn't lessen the consequences, which are of the same order. For Foley, it was a fact of orality at large. Each performance is filled with an exterior knowledge. What I've been able to show in my research is that this common mastery is also crucial at the level of the particular epic. Everybody was intimately at ease in the Iliad or the Nibelungenlied, their plots and subplots, their characters, the conflicts they stage. Every moment of these epics were always present to the listener's mind, which means that finally, let's say, the Iliad is not very different from a sonnet, this short piece of poetry where when you come to the end of the piece, you have all the words in your head and you can draw all the relationships between them. Structure is made efficient. It's exactly the same in an epic because everybody is all his life in it and can spot the many parallels. And so the epic may subtly present its political view, its political issue to the audience. Well, the second item is so obvious that I'll give you just a photograph and a title. The photograph, I've lost a print of an old Japanese engraving showing people hearing the Heike Monogatari being recited with women and men hiding between fans because they're so they're weeping so much. But I'll replace it with a photograph of 1963 that you certainly know. That's when they're killing the dragon in Luxembourg Gardens, their puppet show. The second, about feedback. And the second item is only the title of the first book, to my knowledge, which has developed that. So I'll go directly to my third item, an ever-expanding world. This with the fourth one, that is, that these worlds are purely entertaining, is essential. It's what makes possible for the new to appear. That these two features function together, and I separate them only for analysis' sake. To get new meaning to appear is, we know, the most difficult task for the human mind. The first condition is not to be restricted to, I quote, nearly quote, one way, one story, one meaning. Here I'll begin with the modern side, which you know much better than I do. So just as a reminder, the proliferation of secondary stories, the very existence of this world of stories, means that alternatives are being given. When fans create an apocryphal content, when they parody or imitate, they make it happen. Instead of the product of one mind, the authors, existing alone and by definition with no alternative, we can have the many, the different, the unexpected. It's definitely on the side of the overflow. Let me just insist that this is the case in oral tradition too. I'm not perfectly sure that what we said this morning, that the Iliad and the Odysseys were cases of the one world, one story, really holds. They are really worlds of stories. They are defined by the very existence of these innumerable secondary plots and narratives. But it is true that scholarship and the serious presentation has always tended to separate these secondary stories as unimportant. You know, the analyst school, which reigned for so long, decided it was interpolations and tried to refuse them. I insist that they should not be refused. They're the core of the system. The imaginary world being pure entertainment is also absolutely essential. It's the reason of a real superiority of this type of thinking, of a rational conceptual reasoning. Being pure entertainment, storytelling, and the building of worlds have no responsibility, nothing's at stake, no strings attached. So anything can be said. It leads to expansion, we've seen. It leads also to the appropriation of another logic, the renouncement also to prejudices. This is particularly clear in the case of medieval Japan and France, when serious thinkers were always thinking inside tradition. They were thinking with old tools and trying to make the new out of it. All highbrow productions are made along these lines, and they all refuse contradiction. I insist that epic work and imaginary worlds are, to the contrary, the place where you can renounce the law of non-contradiction. That is, you can have separate narratives which exist and say completely different things. For example, the Nibelungenlied will use the contradiction in the presentation of its hero, which is Siegfried, is presented at the same time as a courtier and as the hero who has slain the dragon. And it's because of that contradiction, I can't go into that now, but it's because of that contradiction that the order, the society's order, can be put into question. Because as he is very powerful as a hero, he can marry the princess, which is exactly the problem 13th century German Empire is facing. I'm not going into that. So nobody will find that a simple, gratuitous story is at fault for not keeping out of contradictions. And that is what will sometime result in the possibility of new thinking. I say sometimes because something is needed yet, and that something is polyphony in the term from Bakhtin. Polyphony is generally equated with dialogism, that is, taking into account the word of the other. But in Bakhtin, polyphony is much more than that. Its voices equal in value. That means that when you have contradictions, you will have them as separate and conflicting truth, and not as one truth and one error. So the logic created by entertainment takes its complete meaning there, by entering the realm of polyphony and letting the different voices, the many and the unexpected, go to its end. In the minute I still have, I'd like to take a tentative example, that's Ghost in the Shell, to sum up everything I said. We have the three moments of the epic. At the first level, it's just a special operation series with big heroes, wonderful equipment, and wonderful missions. But the resurfacing of the disorder is not far. They are not superheroes bringing peace and order to a bad world, or a world going bad. They serve corrupt officials. And they are in a world that is very desperate. The fact that their leader, Aramaki, is just one wonderful person is one small antithesis. But the most interesting point is maybe that beside this line of narrative, repeated again and again through the series and the film, we have independent stories, such as the question of how far can we go into the cyber world. Togusa, but also, so Togusa wants a revolver and not a pistol, is a point of reference, but is only one part of it. The one interesting part, of course, is the sort of discussion between Bateau and the Major going on all through the series about this point. Bateau desperate that the Major will go to the end of the process and renounce everything that made her. Or the question of the laughing man, which is a true case, I think, of polyphony. The problem is who is the bad guy and who is the hero? Is it okay to hack when it's to live in the world we could make out of society? Thank you.